1. Flour gravy on bread, poor man's gravy. Number 1. Flour gravy on bread. And let me be clear about what this is, because this is about as stripped down as breakfast gets. You took the leftover grease in the pan, whatever grease was there, bacon drippings, lard, fatback fat, it didn't matter, you whisked in a spoonful of flour, let it cook until it turned a deep golden brown, then poured in water. Not milk. Not cream. Water. Because milk was not always available and water was free. You stirred it constantly until it thickened into a smooth, dark, nutty gravy that smelled deeply savory and rich despite having almost nothing in it. Then you poured it over whatever bread was in the house. Day-old biscuits. Cornbread from the night before. A plain piece of white bread if that was all there was. This breakfast cost almost nothing. It filled you up completely. And in the hands of someone who knew how to properly brown that flour and build that flavor, it was genuinely, remarkably good. This was Monday morning food. This was the week after payday ran out food. This was the meal that kept families moving when the cupboard was close to bare. 2. Cornmeal porridge, plain grits with drippings. Number 2. Plain cornmeal porridge, or grits cooked down thin with nothing but drippings stirred in. Not shrimp and grits. Not grits with Gouda and bacon from some downtown brunch spot. Just stone-ground cornmeal, water, salt, and whatever fat drippings were kept in the drippings jar on the back of the stove. Every black southern kitchen had a drippings jar. It was a mason jar or a tin can where you poured the leftover grease after every single meal. Bacon fat, pork fat, chicken fat, all of it mixed together into this incredibly complex, layered, smoky fat that carried the memory of every meal that had come before it. A spoonful of that stirred into a pot of hot cornmeal porridge transformed it completely. Gave it depth. Gave it soul. Gave it a richness that you would never guess came from a nearly empty kitchen. Children ate this before school every morning across the rural South for generations. It was warm, it was filling, it was made with love and almost nothing else. 3. Syrup-sopped biscuits, molasses biscuits. Number 3. Syrup-sopped biscuits. And this is one I want you to sit with for a moment because there is real poetry in this breakfast. You made biscuits, and even in the poorest households, biscuits were something a skilled cook could make with just flour, lard, and buttermilk, and you put them on a plate and you poured molasses over them. Not ribbon cane syrup, which we talked about in the last video. Molasses. The dark, thick, slightly bitter byproduct of sugar refining that was sold cheaply because wealthy people didn't want it. Black families wanted it. They understood it. They knew that its bitterness balanced the fat of the biscuit, that its sweetness was complex and deep in a way that refined sugar simply wasn't, and that poured generously over a hot biscuit it became one of the most satisfying things a hungry person could eat at 7 in the morning. Some families added a little butter. Most families didn't have enough butter to spare. It didn't matter. The molasses was enough. This was the breakfast that got children through a full school day. Simple, cheap, and completely underrated. 4. Fried cornbread with cane syrup, Johnny Cakes. Number 4. Johnny Cakes with cane syrup. Now Johnny Cakes are different from hoe cakes, different from crackling bread. This is the simplest possible version. Just cornmeal, water, a little salt, mixed into a thick batter and dropped by spoonfuls into a hot greased skillet. No egg. No buttermilk. No leavening of any kind. Just cornmeal and water. You fried them until the bottom formed a dark, crisp crust, flipped them once, and let the other side do the same. The result was dense, chewy in the middle, crackling on the outside, and deeply flavored with that natural nuttiness of cornmeal cooked in hot fat. You ate them with cane syrup poured on top or with whatever sweet syrup was available. And that combination of crisp, savory cornmeal cake with sweet syrup hitting it while it was still hot from the pan was something that stopped you in your tracks every single time. This was the breakfast that sharecropper children ate before walking 2 miles to a one-room schoolhouse. Made from the cheapest possible ingredients by the most skilled possible hands. 5. Scrambled eggs with fatback drippings and onion. Number 5. Scrambled eggs cooked in fatback drippings with a little onion. Now, eggs were one of the more accessible proteins for black families in the rural South because many households kept a few chickens, even in poverty. But the way those eggs were cooked is what made them extraordinary. You did not use butter. You heated fatback drippings in a cast iron pan until they shimmered, then you threw in a handful of finely diced raw onion and let it cook until it softened and sweetened and started to catch a little color on the edges. Then the eggs went in, and you moved them slowly, over low heat, so they stayed soft and custardy rather than dry and rubbery. The drippings gave them a richness and a smokiness that butter cannot replicate. The onion gave them sweetness and depth. And what came out of that pan was a scrambled egg that tasted more complex and more satisfying than anything you will find at a brunch restaurant charging $16 a plate. Eaten with whatever bread was available, this was a breakfast made from almost nothing that tasted like real abundance. 6. Water biscuits, no milk, no butter. Number 6. Water biscuits. And this entry is important because it speaks directly to the reality of poverty. Some mornings there was no buttermilk. Some mornings there was no lard to spare. What there was flour, a little baking powder, salt, and water. And a skilled cook could still make you a biscuit. Water biscuits are denser than their buttermilk counterparts. They don't have that same flaky, pillowy pull. But they have a clean, simple wheaty flavor, a satisfying chewiness, and they hold up beautifully under gravy or syrup or anything else you put on top of them. Making a good water biscuit is actually harder than making a buttermilk biscuit because you have fewer ingredients doing the work, which means your technique has to carry everything. The grandmothers who made these knew exactly how little to work the dough, exactly how hot the oven needed to be, exactly when to pull them out. This was the biscuit of hard weeks and tight months. It was made with nothing and eaten with gratitude. 7. Fried bread, doughboys. Number 7. Fried bread, sometimes called doughboys or fry bread in the black Southern tradition. You mixed up a simple dough: flour, water, a little baking powder, a pinch of salt. And instead of baking it, you tore off pieces and dropped them straight into hot grease in a cast iron pan. The dough puffed up as it hit the heat, the outside turned golden and blistered and crackling, and the inside stayed soft and doughy and almost hollow in places, like a pocket of warm bread that had trapped steam inside. You pulled them out, drained them for a second, and ate them immediately while they were still hot. With syrup. With gravy. With just a sprinkle of sugar if that's what was there. This was Saturday morning food in a lot of households. Weekend food. Food that children went crazy for because it felt indulgent and special even though it cost almost nothing to make. There is something about fried bread that transcends culture and geography. Versions of it exist all over the world. But the black Southern doughboy has its own character, its own flavor, its own place in a specific history that deserves to be named and remembered. 8. Oatmeal with sorghum syrup. Number 8. Oatmeal with sorghum syrup. And before you skip past this one because oatmeal sounds ordinary, I need you to understand that this is not the instant packet oatmeal of today. This was rolled oats or even cracked hominy cooked low and slow in water until thick and creamy, then finished with a generous pour of sorghum syrup, which is made from sorghum cane, has a deeper, more complex flavor than molasses, a slight earthiness that is entirely its own, and sometimes a little bit of butter if the household had it. Sorghum syrup was a staple in the Black South because sorghum grew well in poor soil, required relatively little, and could be pressed and cooked into syrup at home. Families who couldn't afford sugar could often grow sorghum. So this was a sweetener that came from the land rather than from the store, and it had a flavor that reflected that, wild and complex and real in a way that processed sweeteners are not. Over a bowl of thick oatmeal on a cold morning, it was simple and deeply warming and exactly what a working family needed before a hard day. 9. Pinto bean breakfast, leftover beans fried up. Number 9. Leftover pinto beans, fried up in a skillet for breakfast. Now this one surprises people who didn't grow up with it. But in homes where beans were a staple. And in poor black Southern households, beans were always a staple because they were cheap, filling, and could be stretched across multiple meals. Leftover beans from the night before did not get thrown away. They went into a hot greased skillet in the morning, mashed slightly as they cooked, fried until they started to develop crispy edges and a thick, caramelized crust on the bottom of the pan. You seasoned them with whatever was available: black pepper, maybe a little onion powder, salt. And you ate them alongside eggs or cornbread or just by themselves with hot sauce. This is essentially the same concept as Mexican refritos, which tells you something important about how cultures living in similar conditions of scarcity often arrive at the same genius solutions independently. Fried leftover beans for breakfast is one of the great undersung moves in American cooking. Filling, flavorful, essentially free, and deeply satisfying. 10. Sugar bread, butter and sugar on white bread. Number 10. Sugar bread. And I am ending on this one intentionally because it is the most honest entry on this entire list. Sugar bread is exactly what it sounds like. A piece of white bread, and toward the mid-20th century as families moved north during the Great Migration, store-bought white bread became more common than biscuits in many households, spread with a thin layer of butter or margarine and then sprinkled generously with white sugar. That is the whole recipe. Bread, fat, sugar. And I want you to think about what it means to grow up in a household where that is sometimes breakfast. Where there is enough love to get up and make sure your child has something to eat, but not always enough money to make it more than bread and sugar. And I want you to think about the child eating that sugar bread who remembers it decades later not as a symbol of lack, but as something that tasted sweet, that was made by someone who loved them, that meant morning and warmth and the start of another day. Food is never just food. And sugar bread is not just bread with sugar. It is a whole world of meaning pressed into the simplest possible form.